For some reaction, we're now joined by Laura Harbert, who's a journalist, a creator and a PhD candidate in the Scripps College of Communication at Ohio University. Thanks very much indeed for joining us. What's your reaction to what's come out of the Supreme Court?
Well, I think just hearing your reporting just now, and thank you, by the way, for having me on today. I think it does kind of highlight exactly what's happened here today in America. And it is a different and a new day, and a sobering one.
Is this a shift of seismic proportions to American life, or am I overcooking this?
It's a really good question. So I think one thing that's important to note is that, yes, I'm in West Virginia, which is typically noted in the media as a very red state, a state that elected Donald Trump, et cetera. But like with all things, I think it's very complicated and complex. There are pro-abortion activists here in West Virginia and around the country. And the fact of the matter is that, yes, while half of the states may pass bans, there will be other states where abortion will remain legal. I think that the problem comes when, how exactly do women who seek reproductive health services, abortion and other reproductive health care, how do they access it? And I think that is where you'll see women from states like West Virginia, states like Mississippi, going to places like Chicago, going to places like New York, where abortion will be legal, if they can. And that's a matter of privilege, of course.
I think you've given us part of the answer for my next question, which is, what are going to be some of the consequences for this decision?
Well, I think, what I just said, access to abortion clearly is going to change. I know that I just read online that even though our Senator Joe Manchin, he actually voted for Brett Kavanaugh and for Amy Coney Barrett on the Supreme Court based on the fact that he thought they assured him that they were going to respect the precedent of Roe. So I think what you will see is it'll be interesting to see how the political ramifications play out there. But in terms of women especially, and I think this is really important to note, women who have historically had trouble accessing abortion, so that's poor women, women of color, right? How are they going to access these services moving forward? I think that's a huge question that the country will grapple with for some time. So there's going to be a problem with access, but I think there's going to be a lot of activism around this pushing back now too against this decision. Because I don't know if you know this, but 58%, more than a majority of Americans support legal abortion in the United States.
You talked about the poverty issue and access issue. I've heard someone say that this law is not going to stop abortions. All it does, it moves them from safe clinics to unsafe environments.
Well, I think, that's probably true. I think whenever their legal access is barred and safe access is barred, people have to seek other venues. And that is a real risk now. And again, it will affect poor women. It will affect women of color more in the U.S. So it is a sobering day.
How do you think we got to this point? Is the Supreme Court captured by politicians?
This is a question I think about a lot in my journalism and in my work in general. I think for a very long time, America's been politicized for the last several decades, and it's become extremist rhetoric tends to dominate our discourse, and there's very little listening to each other. And I think one of the biggest mistakes on the left that the left has, possibly made is kind of, especially in the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, kind of dismissing the right as crazy or as that just impossible where we are today. And I think that has been to their detriment. I think had the progressive left kind of taken more seriously where the right was coming from, we might not be where we are today if we'd listened more.
When I hear you say that nearly 60% of Americans are pro-choice, does that mean that the political system doesn't work? Because clearly decisions against what people would want are being made. And then I look back at the 2016 election where Hillary Clinton got more votes than Donald Trump, and yet Donald Trump became president, which suggests that it wasn't the will of the people.
I was talking with a friend today about this very issue, and we talked about how the U.S. is the very first country to become a democratic nation in the history of the world, right? And so we still have a lot to work out, like we didn't get it right. And if you look at the democracies that have formed since the United States, there are more parties, for example, right? The U.S. has this two-party system, which I think is a huge issue that's driving this wedge. That also forces us apart in terms of like compromise and trying to figure things out across a spectrum of ideas. Places like, many nations have more than two political parties in a democratic republic. And I think that's part of it. And so what you've done is force many people to these polarizing extremes. So I think that's part of the answer to that question. I do think that what we have going on right now is a party that's been exploited. When I talk about the GOP, that's been exploited, and power has become kind of like the most important thing. And the willingness to hang on to that power at nearly any cost is becoming more and more apparent in the U.S.
60% of Americans pro-choice. It's a huge number and a huge wave to swim against. Is this decision sustainable?
That's a great question. I think, we've got midterm elections coming up in the U.S. It's going to be really interesting. Will this galvanize Democrats more to go vote? Will this galvanize independents who are pro-choice? And even, middle of the road Republicans? And that all gets back to that party system that we have, right? In the U.S. So will we see people break away, or will it go the other way? And will the right show up? Because they're going to be, very energized by this decision, right? So for some activists, this is a victory for them, right? So it's going to be really interesting to see. I think the other thing that's important to note is that in America, more and more people identify as having no religious faith, or as we call them, nuns. That number is at the highest that it is in our history as a nation. And so I think that's the other thing that's playing into this, is the religious right and how they come to play in all of this. And even though they are a minority, again, because they haven't been heard or listened to, and now suddenly they have this power thanks to politicians like Donald Trump, who are able to kind of effectively engage this wedge strategy to split people.
Laura, we're going to have to leave it there. Unfortunately, we've run out of time, but thank you so much indeed for sharing this time with us and giving us your thoughts on this fairly historic moment in American history. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, that's American journalist Laura Harbert, a journalist and creator and PhD candidate at the Scripps College of Communication at Ohio University, talking to us about this historic reversal of a 50-year-old Roe versus Wade decision, which had given people, women in America, the right to an abortion nationwide. The Supreme Court has reversed that, and now it's believed it could be now illegal in as many as half of the total states in America.